So what I will try to do is, I'm not just going to talk about the new version, the new stuff in version 8, but I wanted to take a step back and also talk about what IMP is and why it's different from other things, and why you might need to look at it. And I'm probably going to do, I'm going to do lots of presentation content for this one, and then I will also try to show the application so that you understand what I'm talking about. Now, this is kind of the agenda I want to cover. I only have 45 minutes, so it will be a challenge, but we'll get through it. So instead of listing a bunch of features, I wanted to do things differently and explain why IMP is different than other solutions and why it actually might be a better solution than what you know in other software. And the reason for that is actually this point. Very often when we start talking about IMP, the question comes up, so how do you make the templates, or how easy is it to make templates? Because many other, if not most other imposition applications work with templates. You create a template and then the PDF flows into the template and you have an imposed PDF or your own JDF. Well, IMP is different in the sense that it doesn't use templates. So the templates are very easy. You don't have to make them. Instead, what it does is it works with a configuration of what you're working with. And you can already see in there, I'll go in a little bit more detail when I fire up the software, but you can already see in there that there is a section where you specify all of the materials that you are going to impose on. That's the section called materials. And then there is a section for all the presses that you have that you might want to use in an imposition. And then at the bottom you have sections for other finishing equipment that you want to take into account as well. So you don't build a template, instead you tell the software what the things are that you work with, what the materials are and the presses are that you want to use. And IMP is going to use this information to automatically determine what the template should be and put your file in there, which is a much better way of doing it because you don't have to manually create templates for each different imposition that you make. So it's a very big difference between what you have in IMP and traditional imposition software like, what is it, Preps and others. The second big difference is that it does all kinds of different jobs, and you don't have to choose. So the screen you see here on the right is a detail of how you create a new product in IMP. And what you can see is that I can add bound components and unbound components. A bound component would be something like a book or a magazine or anything that is folded and then stapled or bound in whatever way. An unbound component would be like a business card or a leaflet or a label or whatever you want. And that could be rectangular or not. So a business card would be an example of a rectangular one, but I can also have round labels or labels with a very irregular shape and so on. And all of those can be added to the same product and they can be imposed together as well. So you don't have to keep them separate, you just throw, if you want to, you just throw everything that is on the same material into the same bag and you ask him to do something with it. And it will happily do so even if the jobs are very diverse. The third difference, if you want, comes at the end. So if I've thrown all these files together and then I've created a plan, which is the IMP definition of how are these jobs going to be put together on a sheet or on multiple sheets, then once you have that, you have those export options. And what you can see there is that IMP supports exporting PDF. So that's a fully imposed PDF file that could be sent directly to the RIP. You can export JDF, which would either be JDF with content or referring to content or without, and it can be JDF for printing and it can be JDF for cutting, so both are supported. And then the last option that you have specifically for packaging and labels and large format, you have a die line option, and that will export the die line that you need to cut the jobs that you just put in a position. And it can generate that in different formats, and I'll show that as well, but it can export it as a DXF file or a CF2 file or even an HTML file, depending on the device that you're going to use to do the cutting. So you can always get both the print version of what you need to send to the RIP and what you need to cut the job in one go. You don't need separate products or separate passes or whatever. It generates all of that information in one go. That's a third big difference, and I don't remember how many differences I have, at least 4. And this is kind of the last one. And this is sometimes also a little bit confusing one, because the people from Insoft don't want me to talk about automation when I talk about Inflow. But there are multiple ways to automate jobs in the IMP ecosystem. And one is an IMP itself, which is a manual application, but all the calculations are already done automatically. You don't have to create templates, it's all automatic. So even there, you have a high degree of automation through the whole process. If that is not enough, you have this separate application, and I'll show that in a second as well, that is called Inflow. And Inflow is a hot folder-based system. You see a number of these hot folders here. Some of these are working, some of the others are not working at the moment. It's a hot folder-based system where you basically either throw a file in, or a CSV file, or an XML file, and then Inflow does all of the work that you otherwise would do manually, and out come the imposed PDFs or the imposed JDFs or anything that you need. Right? So you have different levels of automation depending on what you want to do in a particular workflow in a particular situation. Now, I can't give a whole session without showing things. So let me switch to this. One of the other differences for IMP, but not such a good one, is that it's one of the few applications that we sell that actually only exists on Windows. So you need a Windows environment to run it. We've talked to the developer about that, but apparently it's a little bit harder to do than some of the other things we've asked him to do. So I'm running it here in Parallels, and what you're seeing on screen here is IMP. This is the manual application where you do all your working. And the first thing that I want to show is this item under Tools, and I know it's very small. Luckily, I have this. So under Tools, you have Configuration, and this is this configuration section that I had in the presentation as well. And if I now go look at some of the materials I have, then you can see what kinds of things I can define. So in this case, I'm looking at a coated paper. What is important here is, on the one hand, the technical specifications. So I have this whole section where I specify which sheet sizes and configurations I have to work with. So you would basically enter all the materials that you have. This can be done automatically. It can be imported from a CSV file and so on. So you don't have to define everything manually here. The other technical information that is important is that number 8 that you see at the top, allowed fold depth. If you're creating signatures automatically for books or magazines, that would tell IMP how many times a particular material can be folded, which is important. And it will take that into account and automatically do the right thing. And then what is also important, of course, is the cost. And the cost can be specified either by kilogram, which is what you see there, or it could be specified by sheets. And that allows IMP to calculate automatically how much the material that you use would cost for a particular job. And it will report that to you so that you can do accurate costing of the solution it has found. So that's one part, that's this materials section. And you can specify as many materials as you want. They are grouped by type of material here. So I have a coated paper here. I also have something for digital web or digital flatbed. I have different paper types in there. And like I said, you can import those from a CSV file, and then it is filled up automatically. So you could automatically synchronize an MIS system or an ERP system with the information that you have in IMP. The other part that is important and that I pointed out, and I will open two different devices for this. So let me select this one for starters. So what I've selected here is an offset press, and in this case a sheet-fed offset press. And on the right-hand side you see all of the different parameters that you can set up for that device. And you have the same division as for materials. You have cost-based parameters and you have technical parameters. What we're looking at here is some of the basic technical parameters. So things like what is the stock thickness that this device can handle, what is the minimum sheet size and the maximum sheet size that it can handle, and so on. Notice that I don't specify which papers or materials should be used with this device. IMP will automatically look at your catalog of papers, media. It will compare each of those to the technical specifications of the press that you define in here, and it will automatically figure out which materials are possible for that device. So that is automatic as well, which means that you can't make mistakes. It's automatically calculated. If you change the materials, it will automatically know that as well, because every time you do an imposition, it figures out which the available papers are for a particular press that you select. Now, it's not just the technical stuff, of course. Here as well, I have costing parameters. And this now is reported as dollars. That's because my system is set to dollars. It will automatically take whatever you have set up in there. But you can see that it allows you to specify the speed of the machine, the make-ready time, and so on and so on. And then all the costing of those operations as well. And this allows IMP to automatically calculate, based on the imposition it creates, how much it would cost to do printing on this particular device. What is important is that the costing and the technical specifications depend on the actual type of machine. If I have a digital device and I go to costing, then you'll see that in this case I can specify click costs, which is different than what I had for the offset device. So for all the devices you have and that you want to use with IMP, you simply specify all of the parameters here once, and once you've done that, IMP will automatically calculate with all of these things. Now, how does that work? Well, if we close configuration, I could create a new job. There is a long list of things that you can use to create a new job from. And maybe I can take a DXF file because I want to talk about packaging and labels and so on anyway. So I specify a DXF in this case, and IMP, this is the screen you saw in the presentation earlier. So what it specifies at the top is the bound and the unbound components. I selected a DXF file, that's an unbound component, and so that ends up in my list of unbound components. If I want to look at what that is, I open it up, and you'll see the die line that was extracted. In this case, from the DXF file, if you have a PDF and you know what the name of the spot color is for the different lines that you have, the cut line or crease line or whatever in the PDF file, then IMP can work with PDF as well, just as easily. It will extract the paths, the vector elements with that particular spot color name, and it will show you the outline in exactly the same way. Once I've done that, if I go back to my job screen there, once I've done that, here at the bottom I have something called plans, and that allows me to create a plan. And in this case it's very simple. I only have one component that I specified, so I select that one, and then I have options to plan, and all I have to do is select any device that I want. Let me zoom in a little bit on that. So this is the list of all of these devices that was specified in the configuration section. You also have all of the finishing operations that you can select as well. You select as many of these presses as you want. You could select all of them if you want. Of course, the calculation time will grow a little longer if you have multiple presses. But IMP will calculate based on the material that you selected and based on the presses that you selected. It will give you different options to do the imposition for this particular DXF. And you see in the background there what the option is. If I select a different one, you'll see different sheet sizes, you'll see different configurations and so on. Some of these obviously are not very good. Normally the more to the left you go, the better the configuration is that you want, but you still have freedom to look at the different solutions that IMP finds and to select one that potentially is better. That doesn't make so much sense for a single job like here, but if you start ganging different things together, then it makes a lot more sense to see what the solutions are that IMP comes up with. All of the information that you need to make a decision is presented with that option. So it will tell me what the press is, that is the digital A3 device in this case. It tells me what the sheet is that is going to be used. It will tell me what the actual number of sheets is that will be printed, which die making and die cutting solution it will use, and then all of the costs for that for this particular solution. And at the top, the second line actually, $193 in this case, is a total cost for this imposition. So if you print what you want to print here, using that option, that's the price that it will cost based on all the costing information you specified for the materials and for the presses in your configuration section. So I can now choose what I want, and then I get a layout. I don't have a PDF file in this case. I could still add that now. But I have a layout that is created automatically. And then here at the top, you have those export options. So exporting the PDF, exporting JDF for imposition or cutting, or the die line export either in DXF, CF2 or PDF formats or in HTML. Of course, there is a lot more to it, and there are a lot more options that you can specify. But this is the basic workflow that you will go through with IMP when you start to do this kind of imposition. Let me get back to the story and focus a little bit on packaging, label, and large formats. As I've said already, you can import or you can create a product starting from different file formats, and DXF and CF2 are both supported. PDF is supported as well, as long as you know what the name of the spot colors is that will be used in that particular file. You see, I don't focus on that here, but you see a number of other interesting capabilities here as well. For example, I can use a CSV. If I have 10 different jobs that I want to put in a ganging or into an imposition, then I can put all the information in a CSV file and create everything on the fly that way as well. What is not listed here but also supported is using XML as input format. And then you can specify all of the options or all of the parameters for your job in that XML file, and that will create the job in IMP. You also have, for packaging specifically, and I did this wrong in my demo, I skipped it, but you have a number of things that are very specific to packaging. For example, this particular package has a glue flap here, and because it's a glue flap, it means that there is no need to have bleed on this side. And that means if we print this thing, we can print them against each other, so without any margin in between. which improves on the material that is used. It also improves on the cutting. You only need one cut. If you have a margin, you would need 2 cuts to finish the job. And IMP has a no-bleed tool. That's the one that you see there at the top. What you do is you simply select any edge where there is no requirement for bleed, and then it will take that into account. And if I would redo my imposition after I specify that, I would get a better solution in the end. What happens quite a lot as well is that people say, I have a number of jobs that come in, but I already have a layout. I already have a die that was created, and I simply want to take the jobs that come in with the number of jobs I need to print, and I want to print them in that particular layout. That is supported. There is something called layout templates in IMP. The layout template specifies what the layout will be, both for, so you have the single item on the right-hand side, and then you have the layout of those items on the sheet. And you can start the planning in IMP from that layout template. You tell IMP that you want to use this configuration, so you don't give it any freedom in how the items are arranged on the sheet. You simply tell it to use this, and then IMP will look at what jobs you have and how many of each job that you want to print. And it will calculate a solution where everything uses this particular layout. Typically, those are CF2 files. You import them, and then you do your planning with that. The other thing that you don't have to worry about, I said you don't need templates. What you do in a template in an application like Preps is on the one hand say where the PDF pages go on your sheet. The other thing that you will typically do in a template is determine which marks you have on that template. Could be color bars or barcodes or text marks or anything like that. It's typically also what you specify on a template. Now, you don't have templates in IMP, which makes it a little bit awkward to do this. Luckily, you have something called templates in IMP. So when I said there were no templates, in a way there are, but they're called marks templates. And what you do is you create a template, and it shows you all of the different boundaries, all of the different limits where information is, the sheet, the printable area on the sheet, the bleed boundary, trim, and the die boundary. And you can put marks in such a template that are associated with the sheet itself. So you could say, place this 1 centimeter above the bottom of the sheet, or you can place marks that are orientated or associated with individual items. I can say, look at where the different jobs are, look at the die boundary for that job, and place a mark, an eyelet or a color bar or whatever, place that mark at the bottom boundary of that component, for example. And in that case, it will be reproduced for any component on the sheet. System is very simple again. You create a template like that once, and for each machine that you have, you can create a different template, and you can associate these two together. So if IMP does an imposition on machine A, it will automatically look for the marks template for machine A, and it will place all the marks you specified in there on the sheet. If IMP decides that machine B is cheaper in this case, then it will automatically use the template for machine B. So that part of the process is automated as well. If you still want to place something manually, you can also do that. Once you've created a plan, then you can add as many additional marks on there as you want. So you don't have to use it, but it's very convenient to set this up and then use it automatically. Yes?
Does it support barcodes?
Yes.
So it generates a barcode on the sheet.
Yeah. And you can specify, if you do this manually, you can specify the barcode or the value of the barcode that you want. If you do this automatically with a marks template, for example, you can specify that you want a barcode, and you can work with variables in there so that it automatically picks up the machine name or the date or whatever you want, and then that will be calculated on the fly. So fully supported. And most of the things that it supports in variables are what you would expect. It's the things that that come out of the imposition process, the planning process. So machine name, format of the sheet, the name of the sheet, or the material that was selected, and so on. But you can also, while you specify a job, if you create a job from XML, for example, you could have custom fields for a job that come from the MIS system, and those can be placed on the sheet as well. So it's pretty flexible in that sense. When we look at this from a packaging point of view, something that is very nice as well is that I can ask IMP to store every solution that I've done. So I get a packaging job, I calculate how I'm going to print it, a die is created for that job. Well, I can store the shape of that die in the die database, a die library. When I have a new job coming in, I can ask IMP, and you have some settings to see how close the match needs to be and so on. I can ask IMP to run through my die database and see if there is something that comes close to what I have produced in the past. The idea, of course, is that you could find something that is a good match, and you could avoid having to make a new die because you still have one that is close enough to for what you need. Now, the solutions that you see here are matches that are 100%. That's what it says here. It's a 100% match. But you could also look for matches that are perhaps not 100%. For example, the dust flaps that you have here on this package might be slightly different. Even though they are slightly different, they might still be good enough of a match to use those instead of what the customer specified. Whether or not that's the case is your decision in the end. But IMP can store this information in a database and then allow you to retrieve files from, or retrieve layouts from it, depending on how good a match is that it found. We already talked about this when we talked about how IMP works as an application. But once more, of course, you can, specifically for packaging, have all of these different output formats. And what you see here is when I ask to export the cutting geometry, it shows me what lines I have in there. So in this case, it shows me cut, crease, and perforation lines. It will show these things with different colors. You can specify what the colors are. You can specify what the line type is that you have in there. And then this can be exported as a DXF file or a CF2 file or a PDF file. There are some other capabilities here, but I'll come to that in a second. So all of what we've talked about now is still possible in IMP up to version 7. And then we come to what is new in version 8. And I start again with what we just saw. What I just showed you is this export of die line, and what you can see in there is a number of different colors for the different lines and so on. What you have in version 8 is the ability to customize your line styles in there. Sometimes you want to do something specific. What I've done here is instead of the continuous of the dotted line or a dash dot line, I've created something else. So you can simply here specify a pattern that you want to use, and that allows you to create a custom line type if you need that for an export that you do for a cutting machine, for example. You specify these line styles once. They are set up in the preferences, and then once they are set up there, you can use them anytime you export a die line shape from within IMP. Those die lines can also be exported into reports. If I work with IMP, I can, like I said, I can export the imposed PDF or the imposed JDF or the cutting JDF. But I can also generate a report, and that report contains information on the total costs of what I'm generating. It contains information about the different components that I have, about the sheets that I have, and in version 8, you have an option called Show All Die Lines, and that will export all of these different lines that you have for a component. So both the cut lines, but also any other lines like fold lines or crease lines that you have. And they will be exported and shown with the options for line styles and colors that you have in your setup. Small thing, but sometimes still important. The other thing, and this is again the same dialogue where now I have some additional line types. I have something for crop marks and fold marks and a sheet border in there. So there is some more colors that are defined in there. But what I can do now is in the preview, so if I select different line styles and so on, in IM7 what you got to see was always a standard preview. Now I actually get to preview with the same colors and the same line styles as I've set up in there. So it makes it a little bit easier to judge whether you're doing the right thing without having to export it and open the exported PDF file or DXF file to make sure. But also, and more important, if you look at this here, and you look at the little edit button that you have here at the bottom right, that edit button allows me to bring up a die line editor, and that editor allows me to now add additional elements before I do an export. So you create everything in IMP, but then you realize that in the particular export that you're doing for a cutting machine, for example, you need to add some additional lines or some additional marks somewhere, then this will allow you to do that. Now, this is manual editing. It might be better to set up, to make sure that everything is set up in the marks template, but you can still add additional lines there.
One of the most prominent problems I experience when we try to handle jobs which are provided, or not provided a CF2 or DXF file is that I get the report or the message that there's no closed path found in the file. As far as I saw, there's no way to fix
When you
this.
import them, you...
Yes. With the editor, right?
So the same editor is also available on the import side. We would have to test it. But this would allow you to open one of these files and then edit the geometry you have in there. So you could, if there is something that is not closed, you could actually add an additional line to close what is the problem. You have to see whether that fixes the problem in the end. But you have that die line editor that you have on export. You also can use that on the import side. Yeah. If you have example files, I'd like to take a look at that. It's something that...
What does not closed actually mean? Does it really mean that there are gaps between line segments? Or does it mean that it's not stroked in one path?
It should be that there are gaps in between. But it's a very common problem. We see that in IC3D as well. When you look at these die lines that people have, usually they're not created very well, and there is all kinds of gaps in between them. So that's why I'm saying we should look at a couple of example files and see if we can find out whether this will actually fix it or not. I think the biggest problem is probably going to be finding out where the problem is in the first place, and then what line you have to add to fix it. But it should provide one possible way of looking at it. I think the real solution for what you're saying is probably working with a higher tolerance or something like that, but that's something that needs to be changed in the software. That's not something that is an option, I think, at the moment.
Are you aware of an external editor which is able to handle such problems?
The only thing you can do is try to open it in Illustrator or something like that and fix it there. I mean, that's not a good solution. It's not an automatic solution. You would really need to look at what's wrong. Like I said, I know the problem as well from the IC3D side, and the only thing you can do there is either fix it in Illustrator or import it in IC3D and fix it inside of IC3D, which is not what you want to do here. So it would need to be done in Illustrator probably. It's not an ideal solution, I know. The last point I think that I have on here, and let me see how I do. Yeah, that's good because my time is almost up as well. The last point that I have on here doesn't have to do anything with die lines and so on or packaging. It is more a large format item. Actually, in version 8, there is a lot of attention to large format as a market segment. And the first thing that you'll notice when you look at the configuration in IMP, and this might actually be easier to just show in the configuration here. So if I go back to configuration and I look at presses, there is a new category in version 8. Category is called large format, and under there I have flatbed and roll-to-roll. If I take flatbed, I get all of the specifications that I can set up for a flatbed large format device, and the costing is specifically for a large format device as well. You can specify machine modes that have a different speed, that have a different ink cost, and so on. So that will allow IMP to do correct costing for a large format flatbed press. And the same is true for roll-to-roll. Technical specifications are different. For example, what you have here is a minimum and a maximum cutoff length. If I print roll-to-roll, you don't really have a sheet of a specific size. In fact, the machine can cut off at, in this case, minimally 304 millimeters, but it can print as much as, in this particular example, what is it, 9 meters probably, 9 meters long, and the limits for that depend on the machine. It also depends sometimes on the rib that is connected to the machine, because the longer you go, the longer the images that you're going to process through the rib. So you can set up what the technical parameters are, and again, you can set up what the costing parameters are for this, and that allows IMP to take care of specific LFP machines that you have in that machine mix. So that's one. The second point, and this is the roll-to-roll that I talked about, the second point is that there is not only a way to specify the printers, LFP printers, there's also a way to specify a real digital cutting machine, and that's also in this configuration. If I look at digital cutting, then I can specify a digital cutting machine in there as well. So that's another new option specifically for a large format workflow that you can select. But it's not only that. There are a number of additional things that have changed. The top one is probably the most important one. IMP used to always look at a sheet size and do the planning on a fixed sheet size. If you use this, it can do a variable roll length, and that means if you try to find a solution that it might put some components together and cut at 2 meters, and then could put some more components together and cut at 5 meters, or at whatever it feels is the optimum length to get the lowest cost. The other thing you'll notice, and that comes with a little bit more calculation time as well sometimes, what you'll notice is that IMP will put more effort on, or more stress on, reducing ink and substrate costs. When you do calculations in IMP for offset, for example, you'll notice that it tells you how many sheets it is supposed to print, so what you asked it to generate, and then it will tell you the overrun. And it will show that in orange or in red if the overrun is relatively high. But due to the fact that that doesn't cost very much on the offset side, it doesn't mind to generate a little bit more sheets in that case. In large format print, depending on which substrates you're using and which ink you're using, the costs are much higher. So it tries to minimize any such overruns. It really focuses on printing only what you've asked for. It's a different way for the algorithm to work. And then the other thing that you'll see, and that is also new, is that jobs can be planned on multiple layouts. It used to be so that if IMP made a calculation, you could end up with 5 sheets in total, with all the jobs divided over those sheets. But one job would always be on one particular sheet. So you could not have a job that was printed partially on sheet 1 and on sheet 4, because that made more sense from a calculation point of view. In IMP8 that is possible, and for large format again it allows to more accurately get the number that you want and get a better layout. Again, all of these things put together may make it so that the calculation will be longer for this type of work than it is for typical offsets or ganging of labels and so on. It's not going to take hours, but it could take a minute, where for many other things it takes 5 seconds. So that's kind of the difference that you're looking at. You have some other things that have changed. I think these are minor things, and I'm not going to go into detail for all of them. That way I can stop more or less in time. If you want more information about some of these, there are, I think for most of them, we have a video on the website. I'd have to check. And of course, just come up and ask questions. This is definitely something that could come up in the additional training day on Wednesday. If you're still here and you want to look at things, then we could do that. But there is a long list of smaller things that have changed as well. Those of you who already did something with IMP in customer projects, hopefully you will have seen that the guys at Insoft are very, very responsive when something is asked. We've had a number of projects where smaller additions to the application were necessary, where they asked for specific support. I think most of those get implemented in a matter of weeks. They're actually very good at listening. So if you start looking at IMP, and you come across something that doesn't work, let us know. There is a good chance that we can get it implemented or get a better explanation on how you could do this and what possible ways would be to accomplish what you want to accomplish. And I think that that's all. Thank you very much.